Good morning and good evening, everyone online. Welcome to the second day of the 7th Korean Institute of Criminology International Forum. And I'm Han-Gyun Kim at KIC, the chair of today's sessions. And our second day of the conference will begin by a keynote address by Professor Thomas Holt. And after 10 minutes break, we will have two sessions on cybersecurity and cybersex crime by 1:10. And let me firstly introduce our speaker, Professor Thomas Holt. Professor Thomas Holt is now director and professor in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, and Professor Holt is expert on cybercrime and cyberterrorism. And he will give his keynote address on the topic of the role of online market in cybercrime. Please welcome Professor Holt.
My name is Tom Holt, and I am a professor, and I'm the director of the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University. It's an honor to be able to speak with you all today. I appreciate the opportunity. It's very infrequent that we get the opportunity to speak with our colleagues internationally, so this is a rare pleasure for me, so thank you. I wanted to take some time to speak with you all about the way in which cybercrime is being transformed by the rise of online marketplaces. Traditionally, and as you've no doubt heard from the other speakers, cybercrime has had a very heavy emphasis on the way in which hackers and data thieves steal information and then try to monetize it in different ways. And that's very important, but there's much more to the current place where individuals can engage in crime online. The slide you see here is a website that you can visit that my research team has put together as part of our funding from George Mason University and the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. We've developed a robust research platform around illicit markets operating online. And the URL that you see here will take you to this website. We provide a variety of different white papers. They are short form research articles that you can read. And we also put out webinars and different research summaries that you can read. So if there's anything that I talk about today that you find interesting and want more information, you can visit the URL here and get that from our website. So as I mentioned, there's this very heavy focus on hacking and data theft. And that is important. There's no denying the economic consequences of computer hacking, whether it's coming from individuals or from nation states. But the way in which hacking has evolved over the last 2 decades has had knock-on effects, essentially transforming other types of crime. So there's been a heavy research focus on the way that hackers will sell tools and services to others, creating an essentially cybercrime as service platform, where anything that you need can be leased or acquired from another individual. There's also been research focusing on what are referred to as crypto markets on the dark web. And I'll talk a little bit about the dark web in a few minutes just to clarify what that means. But what's important to note is that a lot of that research considers drug behaviors. So individuals buying illicit narcotics from online retailers. And this is quite a dichotomy that we have either a heavy emphasis on economic hacking or on drug selling behaviors. We know a lot less about all of the other ways in which real world offenses are being enabled by these online platforms, and to what extent the market operations are similar across the physical and digital spaces. Essentially, how do vendors buy, sell, and trade their goods to others? How do customers engage with those individuals? And how do they go about getting product from someone once they've completed a purchase? So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is the way in which these markets are engendering offline crime. and how there are parallels between both the cybercrime community in terms of hacking and malicious software, and that of the physical or offline behaviors enabled by cybercrime markets. One of the key issues that arises is that the forums and shops have differential processes for engaging in commerce. In a forum, because sellers are directly competing with one another, it's a much more transparent environment. The buyers can give feedback to others in the forum and directly engage with sellers. In a shop in a shop setting, what is important to note is that the seller does not have to give any feedback to the potential buyer. Instead, the buyer has to do all of their work up front to determine anything about the seller's legitimacy and the utility of whatever it is that is for sale. So in a forum setting, there's much more transparency and ease of understanding who is a good seller and who will cheat you. Shops, however, remove that ability for transparency and make it much more indirect to know who is good and who is bad. And as a consequence, it's much more difficult for buyers to navigate in shop environments. But shops have proliferated in the last few years as forums are thought to be a risky environment in which to engage in transactions. Not only can you buy tools, but you can buy resources. This is an example of a dark web shop called 0 Day Today. They sell what are known as exploits. An exploit is a type of code that helps to compromise a computer. So if you are running a certain version of Windows, or perhaps a certain Microsoft product, whether it's Windows, Office, or some other resource, there are vulnerabilities in those programs that can be compromised by attackers. So this site enables you to actually purchase that code that will enable you to attack systems. The individual vendors in these sites sell what are sometimes known as 0 day vulnerabilities, meaning that they have not been identified and there is no way to defend against an attack using this exploit. So that's why these resources are very valuable. One thing to note is that all the prices listed here are in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, as you may know, is a type of cryptocurrency. Essentially, that means that it is an online currency that is encrypted through what's called blockchain technology. So that makes it hard to identify the individuals on either end of the transaction, and it complicates the process of tracking it across time. So this is an effective tool to, again, hide where you are, utilizing Tor and operating on the dark web. Coupling that with the use of cryptocurrencies makes it extremely difficult to identify offenders and what practices they're engaging in. So I've mentioned the online issues that are out there. The Social Security number database is a good example of that bridge moving into physical space. In addition to that, we've also observed different resources for sale on the dark web that transcend the cyberspace environment and move into the physical. This is an example of a vendor on the dark web who offers hitman services, essentially contract violence for sale on the dark web. We've been able to identify 24 of these vendors and analyze what they sell. And across these 24, we find surprisingly that the price they offer for various types of violence in physical spaces mirrors what's been observed in the past. So even though prior research has focused on real world individuals who've associated and engaged in paid violence, we see that these vendors on the dark web mirror those price points such that they are not overwhelmingly high. Instead, they appear to be close to what an individual might expect to pay for what is clearly an illegal service. And what's interesting is that there's no evidence to date that any online hitman provider has actually engaged in real-world violence. Instead, these appear to be designed to draw in unsuspecting individuals to be cheated. And I realize that sounds strange to sort of talk about a service like this, but it's important to note that this is essentially a way to engage in fraud of individuals who are requesting hitman violence. You're not going to engage in these acts of violence as the vendor, but you will take money from people who think that you will give them whatever it is they're paying for. And that presents a very interesting dynamic. It can be hard for buyers to know who is legitimate and who is not. I've mentioned that on the hacking side, but that's true also on the physical side. And the hitman aspect seems to be one area where there is consistent fraud and very, very few examples of anyone legitimately offering services. And to give you a little bit more exposition on this kind of dynamic, I'll walk you through some of our analyses. But what I wanted to show you first is essentially the crime script for identity document purchasing. This is a criminological concept that helps us to understand how offenses occur from start to finish. And this notion of crime scripts comes from the routine activities and situational crime prevention approaches. If you're familiar with either of those theoretical frameworks, they argue that humans are rational actors and they make decisions based on the calculus of risk and reward. So in developing a crime script, it's a way to understand how a crime takes place, making the assumption that the offender and the parties involved are both rational and reasonable actors. So in this case, we focused on trying to assess the crime script for the purchase of fraudulent identity documents through online vendors. And we focused on the initiation and entry process. And what that means is how you go about actually purchasing an ID. So you have to identify a vendor. And since open and dark websites both offer these products, the customer has to determine which vendor they feel is the most reliable. At that point, they can contact the vendor. And we observe differential forms of contact depending on whether the vendor operates on the open web or on the dark web. Dark web vendors preferred encrypted email applications, whereas our open web vendors would even list things like a WhatsApp phone number so that you could text or instant message the individual. At that point, if you're contacting a potential vendor, that means you're interested in making a purchase. At that point, you're typically required to make a payment. And that's where we shift from initiation into action. So the middle frame that you see here, the vendor actualization and doing, is the process that occurs once payment is received by a vendor. At that time, the vendor will begin to produce the document as they describe it through their website. Some took the time to say that they utilized the same printing tools, resources, holograms, any papers or physical materials needed to make the ID in the same way as the legitimate document vendors. And we are trying to assess now how that process actually works. Is it that they have insiders within government offices? Are they purchasing the paper and printing resources needed? How are they going about getting the materials needed to actually complete that purchase? Once a purchase has been made and the vendor receives their Bitcoin payment and they manufacture the ID to the specifications provided by the customer, they're then shipped out. And it's at that point where there is an exit strategy that can be implemented. In most cases, the exit process is as simple as the customer receiving the item, validating that it is correct, and then attempting to use it. Very few of our vendors said that they would offer replacements. You had to be able to demonstrate that the identity document was damaged in the shipping process or transit process. If you can show that, or if the vendor deliberately entered in wrong information, then they would manufacture one for you at no cost. But that's a very small subset of the vendors that we identified. Instead, most of them just said that once it is shipped, it is your responsibility. However, two of our vendors did not just simply offer the exit strategy of take your purchase and leave. A small proportion, those two, also offered to run what is referred to as an affiliate program. So essentially, you can become a full-time vendor for that document creator by selling IDs to others in physical space. This was especially targeted to individuals in the United States and the UK, emphasizing you can sell our documents to underage people so that they can enter bars and clubs. And it's an effective way, they would say, to make money, because you can charge your face-to-face customers any price that you want. They will have a set price for you as their customer to actually manufacture the goods. So you can make hundreds of dollars over what the actual cost to you is to produce the ID. And the supposition is that the vendors of the documents will make more money by working through the affiliates because they are guaranteed a certain number of transactions per month. If there is such a dynamic and diverse market for goods and services, how do we affect it? How do we actually eliminate any of these markets? And it's not clear how we do that. Part of it is due to the nature of advertising. As I mentioned at the start, there are forums. So a forum provides a single location for multiple vendors, but one takedown of one forum will affect everyone. But all those vendors and those customers can go to other places. They can move to decentralized shops and try to make it harder to be identified and easier to operate. In addition, the dark web operations make it harder to identify who is selling what products and where. Additionally, the actors for dark web purchases and open web to some extent as well can easily move around. And as a function of this, the efforts to actually affect the markets might be better targeted by the use of different social techniques rather than law enforcement techniques. Specifically, if we want to engage in law enforcement investigation and takedown, one option might be to go after the facilitators of illicit market operations rather than going after the vendors. The logic there is that if you can't host your website in a place, then it's that much harder for you to operate. If you can't receive payment, then both your customers and you as the vendor will be very dissatisfied because you need the money in order to keep engaging in the behavior. The value of feedback can also be leveraged against the market itself by finding ways to create fraudulent feedback to disproportionately skew an individual's reputation toward the negative as opposed to the positive. So there's a lot of different ways that we can think about it. So these are just some ways to think about what can be done to affect dark web and open web operations. But we shouldn't forget that these things are going to continue no matter what's happening. There is such a robust market now for physical and digital goods. Anyone and everyone can find them. And it's going to continue regardless of what we do in terms of law enforcement practice. So instead, we have to think about how we can disrupt. What is the most effective way that we can mitigate market operations without necessarily having to engage in years-long investigations? The more creativity we might be able to employ, the faster we can get to effective market disruption without necessarily engaging in historically long and drawn-out law enforcement operations. So with all of that having been said, we are still in the process of collecting our data. So if the website I mentioned at the beginning, if any of our research is of interest, anything I've talked about today, you can visit the URL at the bottom and it will show you all of our white papers and briefs and different training modules that we've created. Additionally, we're in the process now of doing some research looking at the networks that support these groups. And we're doing some price point comparisons between the pre-COVID period where all of our data is from and the current post-COVID period we're living in. So we're collecting data to see if there's been shifts in what's available in the market or how they're charging and receiving goods. So With that having been said, if you have any questions at all, admittedly, I know I won't be able to take questions today, but you can feel free to contact me via email. My phone number is listed here as well, or if you're a Twitter user, I'm happy to connect with you there as well. So thank you for your time. Again, I greatly appreciate it. It's an honor to get to speak with all of you today. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Holt. Professor Holt focuses on the role of illicit online market in cybercrime, which is one of the main issue at this international forum. So thank you again, Professor Holt. And now we will have 10 minutes break, which will be followed by session 3. So we will have 10 minutes break by 9:50. Thank you. Hello again. Welcome back to the second day of the KIC International Forum. And I'm Han-Gyun Kim, Senior Research Fellow at KIC, the chair of the third session for today. The session 3 will discuss about cybersecurity, and the session have 3 presenters and 3 panelists. And let me introduce the first speaker, Professor Choi. Professor Kyung-Sik Choi is now professor at Boston University and director of graduate program in cybercrime investigation and cybersecurity. He's an expert on cybercrime investigation and computer forensics. And he also has joined KIC Cybercrime Project, which is virtual forum against cybercrime in cooperation with UNODC. Professor Choi will give his presentation on the topic of case study of problems in digital infrastructure. Professor Choi, you have 20 minutes, please.
My name is Kyung-Sik Choi. I'm a professor and the director of cybercrime investigation and cybersecurity program at Boston University. I would like to give a special thanks to the KIC for inviting me as a guest speaker. It is a great honor and pleasure to be part of this meaningful event. Let me briefly talk about the evolution of crime. The classical school of criminology was not interested in studying criminal behavior, but rather law-making and legal processing. Then we start empirically studying criminal behaviors using various advanced scientific methods since early 1900s. We currently share knowledge for facilitating various criminal justice practices. Then cybercriminology has been very recently emerged. We are in the stage of the fourth industrial revolution using cyber physical system. IoT, cloud, and AI would be good examples. This is the age of global connection, which can provide the power to transform entire system of production, management, and governance through the cyber physical system. In other words, we live in a society where technology is essential for living daily life. I argue we are in the era of cybercriminology. Cybercriminology is the interdisciplinary study of the causes of cybercrime, which combines knowledge from criminology, psychology, sociology, economics, political science, computer science, you name it, like any scientific disciplines to deliver in-depth understanding of nature of cybercrime in criminal justice field. In cybercriminology, many traditional criminological theories have been applied to explain the causes of crime. One of the predominant theories is routine activity theory. In 1979, Cohen and Felsen proposed their routine activity theory, which focused mainly on opportunities for criminal events. Cohen and Felsen posited that there are 3 major factors that contribute to criminal victimization: motivated offenders, suitable target, and the absence of capable guardianship. Crime is likely to occur via the convergence of 3 factors. The cyber routine activities theory, which I proposed, initially argued that computer crime victimization is influenced by digital capable guardianship, simply cybersecurity protection software, and online lifestyle. They are human errors. In this current study, my research colleagues and I revisited Felson's target suitability measures. While studying cybersecurity, I strongly felt the original cyber routine activities theoretical premises should be revised to underscore the characteristics of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Using unique data set compiled by Shodan, which is scan ports and IoTs, this study aims to theoretically extend cyber routine activity theory by revisiting Felson's target suitability measures, VIVA, visibility, inertia, value, and accessibility, with cybersecurity angle. This research also empirically explores how and whether the online lifestyle of cybersecurity managers who manage organizations' cyber infrastructure linking to vulnerability in cybersecurity. In particular, this current study identifies, analyzes, and empirically tests the network and digital infrastructure vulnerabilities in Massachusetts. Greater Boston, in particular, is an area where universities' highly educated population, research and development and technology, healthcare, biotech, and cybersecurity companies are highly concentrated. Let me discuss the cybercrime application of routine activity theory. Motivate offender. Dr. Grabowski said cybercrime is the same old wine with a different shape of bottle. Indeed, greed, lust, power, revenge, adventure, and the desire to taste forbidden fruit, they are most evident motivation of cybercriminals. We don't really see substantial difference between cybercriminals and street criminals in terms of their motivation. However, new shape of bottle, meaning different method of crime victimization using internet and technology. We can easily speculate motivated cyber offenders are given situational factor. Thus, the motivated offenders measurement was not included in my current study. Capable guardianship. Unfortunately, the current capability of many law enforcement agencies are very limited. Most local and state law enforcement officers lack knowledge concerning the processing of computer data and related evidence. The CyberLAT replaced this factor with cybersecurity software that are understood as a digital capable guardianship. In the CyberLAT, major cybersecurity software was the most important factor to mitigate computer crime victimization. In the current study, we did not include this factor due to the difficulty of collecting all the cybersecurity software information reflecting each of organizations in Massachusetts. When studying cyber infrastructure vulnerability, it is essential to re-examine target suitability measures. Felson presented 4 different target suitability measures based on potential offenders' perspective. They are value of target, the inertia of the target, the visibility of the target, and the access to easy exit from offense's location. Crime opportunities for cyber intruders can be analyzed in terms of the vulnerability of the systems and networks. A vulnerability assessment is the process in which one can identify, quantify, and prioritize or rank the vulnerabilities in a network, infrastructure, or system. In other words, a vulnerability assessment is a search for bugs, weakness, or exposures so that we can apply, patch, or fix to prevent a compromise. To understand vulnerability assessment better, it is important to briefly discuss the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, Cbss, which is commonly used in cybersecurity. The Cbss is a standard measurement system for industry, organization, and government that have need of accurate and consistent vulnerability severity score. The Cbss is a score from 0, least vulnerable, to 10, most vulnerable. And it is not only a good mechanism for understanding the severity of vulnerability, which intrinsically turns into potential threats, but also for informing cybersecurity experts and managers when deciding what to prioritize and when to patch. Let's back to BIVA with cybersecurity application. Value. Value is up to cyber offenders' intent. It could be monetary value for financial cybercrime or sexual gratification for cyber sexual predators. In this study, we follow tradition of value being regarded as a given condition. Inertia. In human-to-human confrontation, it may be more difficult for the offenders to commit violent crime against a physical, stronger target. Comparatively, in cyberspace, the level of inertia of crime target may be affected by volume of data if cybercriminals have a limited computer system. However, now cybercriminals enjoy unlimited cloud space and incredible speed of internet. In a cybersecurity field, the inertia of crime target becomes much more important. If a perpetrator comes into a system seeking vulnerable spots as potential targets, the complexity of computer system might hinder the perpetrator from intrusion and attacking potential victim systems and digital infrastructure. Visibility. The visibility of crime target refers to how much information is visible to potential offenders. Cybercriminals gain the digital information from online users through various hacking tools such as IP trackers and password snippers. Thus, I argue that cybercrime targets are globally visible to cybercriminals in cyberspace in the original CyberLAT. However, managing the vulnerability of system, networks, and software and hardware can be understood in cybersecurity. In the current study, attack vector is a measure to explain how the vulnerability is exploited. Accessibility. Accessibility refers to as the ability of an offender to get to the target and then get away from scene of crime. The accessibility of crime target in relation to vulnerabilities in cybersecurity is understood as being easily attackable. Authentication, which requires credential before exploitation, was used to measure accessibility as a theoretical component. Therefore, three components of target suitability in VIVA were independent variable. As I mentioned, value is a given situation. Complexity is defined as an additional step to exploit the internal computer system. Vector is measured to explain how the vulnerability is exploited. Authentication requires credentials before the exploitations. Dependent variable is very important here. To assess the vulnerability of the system, we initially use the core cybersecurity requirements consisting of the three main risk domains: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which is known as the CIA triads. We did not include confidentiality as our dependent measure because this component is only tied with the information that are not directly relevant to a system vulnerability. Integrity is a main dependent variable in the study. Integrity is defined as assurance of the non-alteration of documents or data. It assumes data remain in its intended state and can only be edited by authorized parties. Attacks against the integrity are alteration attacks. That's kind of prevalent. Availability is the second dependent variable, defined as accessibility of the information, resources requiring the routine maintenance and upgrading of hardware, software, operating system environments. It ensures the authorized parties have unimpeded access to data when required. Attacks against availability are destruction attacks. Shodan is a search engine for internet-connected devices. This search engine quickly assists finding global computers running a certain pieces of software along with metadata such as geo information, hostname, operating system, etc. In addition, Shodan is fully capable to check cybersecurity vulnerabilities that infect in certain hosts. The Shodan works 24/7 and updates the database in real time. At any moment you query the Shodan website, you will be able to collect images and live data from internet-connected devices, such as webcams with open remote access. We can search servers with vulnerabilities based on countries, state, or city level. As you can see, we can easily narrow down to servers in South Korea and collect additional information from a company. Let's examine Korean company, Korea Telecom. I picked this company because I see CVE 2019-0708, a remote code execution vulnerability, which is a critical cybersecurity vulnerability. Plus, I even see their operating system, Windows 7 version, that is vulnerable to ransomware attacks. Let's check this CVE through Shodan exploits search. Shodan returns detailed information derived from Metasploit, which is one of the most popular pen testing open source programs. We can also retrieve detailed information from National Vulnerability Database. MVD assessment provides summary and Cbss severity level. In this case, version 3 scores 9.8 critical and version 2 score 10 high. Version 3 offers more detailed cybersecurity vulnerability assessment score when compared to version 2. However, version 3 has a limited information on all the vulnerabilities. This vulnerability score shows perfect score of 10, meaning this server can be extremely easy to be attacked, and the system is likely owned by attacker without much efforts. I hope you understand the concept of Shodan such utility. Let's move on to the current study. After completing a search based on Massachusetts, we extracted data with an option of downloading the search result in JSON and CSV format. JSON format delivers the collected information with all accompanying metadata. The CSV format returns a file containing the IP, port, banner, organization, and host name. We use the Shodan command program to transform the file information to reader-friendly format using parse commands. From the Shodan search, we identified 39,032 servers and 1,579 vulnerabilities. Let's preview the transform file. We moved the detailed information into our database, TSV format. Okay, here's our file preview and our collected data. Here's the descriptive stats for sample. For the analysis of the current study, negative binomial regression model was used. The table displays the zero-order relationship among variables. From control variables, information technology industry was identified as a high cybersecurity risk when compared to other industries by excluding all major variables. Two major cybersecurity vulnerability factors, availability and integrity, were significantly and positively related to three components of the target suitability in VIVA: vector, complexity, and authentication, as well as three cybersecurity managers' online behavior. Vector was a significant of both availability and integrity in the full model. In other words, the more the information is visible to potential offenders, the more systems are vulnerable for availability, in this case, destruction attacks, and integrity, alteration attacks. However, authentication was significantly and negatively related to only availability, meaning the less organizations systematically support individuals to use authentication login, the more systems are vulnerable for destruction attacks. In terms of cybersecurity managers' online behavior, count over 1 year was significant of availability, while total gap days and count over 1 year had a significant and positively effect, and count over 5 years had a significant and negatively effect of integrity. The organization that did not update software patches for 1 year, short period, were more likely to be vulnerable of destruction and alteration attacks. There are many ways to expose, alter, disable, destroy, steal, or gain unauthorized access to computer system, infrastructure, networks, operating system, and IoT devices. Usernames and passwords are still the most common types of access credential and continue to be exposed in data leaks, phishing scam, and by malware. The findings indicate two-factor authentication is also important to minimize destruction attacks. Weak passwords and reused password mean one data breach can result in many more. Missing or poor encryption for data and rest can mean that sensitive data or credentials are exposed in event of data breach or data leak. As you may know, ransomware has been prevalent during the COVID-19. Ransomware is a form of extortion where data is deleted or encrypted unless ransom is paid. Minimize the impact of ransomware attacks by keeping your system patched and backing up important data. Ensure that each of the organization's key systems are backed up as a complete system through processes such as imaging to enable the quick recovery of entire system. Misconfiguration of cloud services or using default credential can lead to data breaches and data leaks. Failure to listen patches update substantially increase the vulnerability issue in destruction and alteration attacks. The study findings suggest the partial and or mediating role of cybersecurity managers' online behavior on the link between target suitability measures and vulnerability. Specifically, the impact of authentication on integrity can be fully mediated by managers' online behaviors. Organizations with the higher level of visibility and accessibility of cyber infrastructure led to the greater vulnerability for destruction and alteration attacks. It doesn't matter how sophisticated your internal network security and information security is if sensitive data are accessible. This means it is essential to have structured information security policy and information risk management program. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Choi. Professor Choi has introduced Shodan, a kind of search engine, I believe. It's very impressive. And Professor Choi also has pointed out how to measure cybersecurity vulnerability and also how to build secure and hygiene cyber environment. Thank you. And the second speaker for session 3 is Professor Kim Kwang Raymond Chu. Professor Chu is an expert in information security and now professor of the University of Texas at San Antonio. And Professor Chu has got so many awarded and scholarship for his excellence in his scholarship. And Professor Chu will give his presentation on the topic of how to secure our cyber future. Professor Chu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can anyone hear me? Testing, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, sure, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank KIC and the conference organizers for the opportunity to present at this virtual event. I'm also very glad that I'm speaking directly after Dr. Choi because he has set the scene very nicely as to why we should be interested to study cybercrime and also cybersecurity. I'm sure that this comes as no surprise to you in the sense that our society has become more digitalized, more interconnected. For example, if you look around us, whether it's in the office or at home, we have IoT devices, which is also known as Internet of Things. They are around us. For example, your smart home IoT device. You also have your IoT device on us. For example, your Fitbit, your Samsung device, and so on. And also you have your IoT devices in our body as well. For example, you have pacemaker or even artificial limbs, such as arms or legs. Yeah, and so on. So in other words, our surroundings, the place that we are in, and our bodies are increasingly influenced and controlled by digital devices and systems. And these digital devices are constantly talking to each other and exchanging information. They're collected from around us, our surrounding, and also from our body in us and so on. So as you can see on the slide, which is this is taken from a fairly recent Gartner research article. Based on this research, they observed that technology is changing the notion of what it means to be human. As workers and citizens see technology as an enhancement of their abilities, our human condition also change as well. So from an organization perspective or from a society perspective, we need to understand what the effects are of this technology. That has the impact on us, and also to reset our expectation for what this technology means. This is particularly important, especially in the current COVID situation where most of us are actually working and studying from home. And you may also have heard of this terminology, cyberization. So basically, it's actually the process of forming a new cyber world. I think earlier, Dr. Choi mentioned about cyber physical world. Yes, indeed, increasingly, our physical devices, the things around us, the things in us, and our body itself is actually increasingly interconnected with the cyber world. So that's why we have this new cyber combined worlds, in the sense that we have physical, we have social and mental worlds all combined into one cyber combined worlds, or one bigger ecosystem. So as with any technologies, whether it's the older technologies or the current emerging or contemporary technologies, there are always potential cyber criminal and privacy risks and challenges. For example, Benjamin Franklin once observed that nothing in this world is said to be certain except for death and taxes. I'm sure if we add cyber attacks or cyber crime to this list, no one will actually object to this, right? So from both policing and also cybersecurity perspective, I believe that it's important for us to understand how cyber attacks or cyber attacker can actually take over our system, how they can get into our systems. For example, what witnesses assist in our cyber physical worlds? Are these witnesses in the people, that's you and me, home users? Are these witnesses in the process, or are these witnesses in technologies? It can be any of these or a combination of these. And any of these vulnerabilities can be exploited to get access to not only our data, our system, but also our body, as our body are increasingly interconnected with other devices and systems. So by understanding how cyber attacks can take place, we can then design more effective security solutions. That's why it's important to study both the cybersecurity and also the cyber offensive research. So moving ahead, the threats are no longer in cyberspace, because 10, 20 years ago, we were thinking, okay, cybercrime malware is only going to affect our system. It's not going to affect us. It's not going to affect my body. But increasingly moving ahead, it's going to be branded. The threats are going to be cyber physical threats, and they are going to have physical consequences. And also the threat actors are no longer script kiddies who are sitting in the garage. They're going to be nation states. They're going to be advanced persistent threat actors. So for example, looking at this screen, I'm not sure how many of you have watched this movie, which is maybe 2 or 3 years now, Fast and Furious 8. So in this scene itself, I mean, this is again Hollywood, but again, how true, I mean, whether it's feasible, I mean, that's something that we can discuss offline. So for example, in this particular scene, the vehicles were actually, vulnerabilities in these vehicles were actually exploited, and hackers actually took over remote control of these vehicles and then caused them to crash. Think about it. Last year, and again 1 or 2 years ago, there were a number of terrorist attacks in Europe, in various countries in Europe, where terrorists actually get behind the wheels and crash into places of mass gatherings. What if in the future, where instead of someone getting behind the wheels physically, what if someone actually took control of the vehicles by exploiting vulnerabilities in your Tesla or other smart vehicles, and use them as weapons of mass destruction and drive them into places of mass gathering? And again, you may think that this is science fiction, this is Hollywood. And I think this is just a few days old, this news on the slide, where a group of researchers from Belgium, they actually find an exploit that can actually allow them to steal a Tesla Model S in minutes using hardware that costs only $300. And this is something that's doable. So right now, it may not be possible to really remote control a vehicle and cause it to crash, but in the future, that could happen. Well, I mean, unlike physical crime, I mean, unlike our traditional crime, cybercrime is much harder to attribute and identify. For example, how are we able to identify or accurately attribute who is actually behind the keyboard, who is actually carrying out the attack? Even someone who actually designed the malware, or if you do a IP tracing, the last IP address is not necessarily the attacker. In most cases, the last IP address is also probably the victim, because they have been compromised to carry out the attack. So how are we going to attribute, or how are we going to identify who the perpetrator is? Is it your next door neighbor, or is it a nation state? And again, there's really no clear-cut definition between cyber war and cybercrime. So I'm sure many of you in the audience have heard of cyber war. And again, what constitutes cyber war? We know the distinction between war and crime. But when it comes to cyberspace, it's hard to actually make that distinction between cyber war and cyber crime, especially when many of the tools, many of the techniques used, they overlap. You can use the same, you can use the same malware, or you can use the same exploit in a cyber criminal activity, or you can use the same exploit and tool in a cyber crime-like activity. And again, why do we really need to understand, or why do we really need to attribute who the attacker or who the offender is? Well, because the response protocol are different. For example, if it's a cyber war or national security event, most likely the responding agency will be National Security Agency, or for example, in the US, it might be FBI or other agencies. Whereas when it comes to cybercrime, it's most likely going to be your state or local law enforcement agencies. So the protocol are actually different. And again, when it comes to cyberspace, there's many ways to plant false flag. I'm not sure how many of you in the audience is familiar with this term. So basically, this is an attack, a cyber attack. It's staged in such a way that attempts to fool their victims and the world into believing who is actually behind the attack. So for example, a nation's group A may be carrying out the attack, but they are trying to impersonate group B, and by using the tools, the techniques, and even using the coding in a certain language to try to plant a false flag operation, a false flag cyber operation. And then the question is how easy or how challenging it is to actually conduct such a false flag cyber operation. It really depends. And as long as you have the resources, it's not that hard at all. And again, this is going to complicate attack attribution. But, and also when it comes to evidence, whether can we trust the evidence that we actually collected from the compromised systems? So there are a number of implications. And many of these IoT, many of the systems that we use, whether it's at home, whether it's in office, they're actually not designed with security in mind. And I think Dr. Choi actually has shown Shogun, so I'm not going to go through that. And again, as Dr. Choi has mentioned, it's very easy for anyone with no skill set at all to just use a search engine, Shogun and others, to actually find vulnerable IoT devices. And once you find them, you can actually use off-the-shelf tools to actually exploit those devices. And in fact, some of these devices, the users do not actually change the default username and password. So it's very easy for anyone to actually gain access, remote access of this, for example, your CCTV cameras or your ring camera, and then to actually be able to conduct surveillance or gain access into the homes. And this is a study we did 2 years ago. So basically, we did a passive scan of the IoT devices out there. What we want to find out is how many vulnerable IoT devices are there out there? Is that in the thousands, in the millions, or what? So basically, we, as part of this research, and again, I mentioned it's about 2 years old now, we actually identify a number of in the wild IoT coordinated probing campaigns. So these probing campaigns are not necessarily malicious because they could be carried out by researchers, another group like us, who actually want to understand the cyber threat landscape for IoT devices. But what is more concerning is we actually identify more than 120,000 internet scale exploited IoT devices. And some of these IoT devices are actually operating in critical infrastructure sectors, such as your DAM, your DAM, or your smart grid, or some of your IT sectors. And we were actually able to infer over 140 large-scale IoT-centric probing campaigns as well. And in this case, because this is the research, we could not actually engage with these vulnerable IoT devices, but any cyber criminals could actually have gone a step further and trying to exploit these IoT devices to gain access to data or to gain access to whatever is connected to them. And again, there are a number of tools. I think Dr. Choi has mentioned earlier as well, Metasploit. So there are a number of tools, there are a number of off-the-shelf tools, commercial and free tools out there that actually allow anyone with very minimal skill set to actually identify vulnerabilities in systems, devices, and then gain control of these devices and systems. This is actually a work that we've done quite recently. So basically, we use deep learning, which is a form of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we actually try to fast for vulnerabilities, unknown vulnerabilities in IoT systems. So in this particular case, using our techniques, we actually managed to identify 9 previously unknown vulnerabilities, including a vulnerability in a middleware from Huawei, which is a Chinese company, that actually allow us to carry out denial of service attack or trying to crash a system that actually deploy this middleware. And this is just one of many works out there. Trying to identify vulnerabilities is actually a very active research area. Okay, when it comes to digital forensics, data may not always be available for a range of reasons. For example, in terms of short data retention time, in terms of a lack of extraction capabilities, whether it's by law enforcement or by organizations, as well as the cost associated with conducting such an investigation. So as a result, when it comes to collecting data about an incident which has just occurred, they may not be able to identify the cause of the security incident. And why do we need to understand what caused the incident? Because by doing so, we are able to identify what happened, how the attacker got into the system. I mean, what exploit or what vulnerabilities were actually leveraged or abused to actually gain access to the system, what data was stolen, who was responsible, and so on. So we are able to identify, we are able to build a timeline. So hopefully we are able to understand what has happened, and we are able to design better mitigation solutions to prevent the same thing from happening again in the future. However, it's not realistic to suggest that any item connected to the target device can also be automatically seized for forensic data collection, because many of these devices, because they're IoT, they're internet connected, they can be sitting somewhere else in another country, in another city, or even in the cloud data center, say from one of the big companies. So there's just no way for us to be able to collect the data in real time. So that's why a few years ago, my student and I, we actually proposed a concept called forensic by design, or also known as forensic ready systems. So forensic by design is somewhat conceptually very similar to secure by design or privacy by design, which I believe many of you in the audience will be somewhat familiar with. So secure by design means that you design the system from day one with security in mind. So you have the built-in authentication mechanism, you have the built-in intrusion detection mechanism, and so on. Whereas privacy by design, as the name suggests, you build the system from day one to think about privacy, how to actually ensure the privacy of the data of the user. When it comes to forensic by design, so basically what we have in mind is, so when something happens, you know where to look for evidence. For example, many of us have flew on aeroplanes. So when the plane crash, unfortunately, where do we look for evidence? We look for evidence in the black box, also known as a cockpit recorder. So what we are trying to propose here is somewhat similar in concept. So when a system was hacked or when a system was compromised, when you need to conduct an investigation, so instead of trying to look around the system, trying to identify where the data is or where the evidence could sit, I mean, we can actually go to this black box, and this black box can be a centralized or a decentralized black box, so that you can actually get the evidence, collect the evidence that you need. So this, okay, if you can see this figure, so basically we are thinking about how the black box is actually this item 3, the secure multi-tenant storage. So basically, all the data, and again, this type of what you may ask. So what sort of data is this digital forensic black box going to collect? And again, it can be customized based on the organization. So based on the sector, by understanding what is important, what data is actually important to the organization, and what our system or what our network is actually being deployed. So and again, as I mentioned earlier, this black box can actually be centralized or decentralized. And again, because all these evidence are actually stored in this black box, you have to ensure the integrity of the data. So security is actually very important. So once you have this data, and this data collected in this digital forensic black box, it's not just for use for forensic purpose, but it can also be used to train your machine learning model. Because by collecting all this information, you're able to train your machine learning model to identify what is the normal behavior in your network and what is abnormal behavior, so that you can actually detect any intrusions in real time. And again, when it comes to digital forensic or even cybersecurity, how do we actually share information, or how do we actually share knowledge about how to conduct a vulnerability assessment, or how to go about doing forensic analysis of the newer device, for example, IoT device? And just think about IoT devices. There's so many IoT devices out there. There's such a broad range of IoT device. It's almost impossible to find someone or even a team of forensic investigators to actually know all the IoT device, to know how to go about collecting evidence about all the IoT devices, because they have different operating systems. They may have different file system or even firmware versions. So the question, one of the challenges here is actually how do we actually efficiently and effectively share information or share knowledge about these forensic artifacts? For example, where their location could be, as in the location of the artifacts, what are the forensic implications, the value of the artifacts, and also their data structure. We are sharing the artifacts themselves, because in most cases, some of these artifacts are somewhat private. They consist of potentially PII, personal identifier information, or some information relating to the IP of an organization. So how do we actually share this knowledge? We are sharing the artifacts themselves. So what we proposed in this school, again, that was last year, we actually came out with a schema that actually allowed us to capture. The schema you can think of is some sort of a high-level abstract template where basically, for example, if you analyze a phone, for example, iPhone, the latest iPhone or the latest IoT device, some IoT device. So by doing a forensic analysis of this IoT, an in-depth forensic analysis of this IoT device, you are able to identify, okay, so what are the potential type of forensic artifacts we can collect from this type of device? So where are the locations, in the sense that where can I collect these artifacts from? So what are the forensic implications? What are the data structures? In what format are they stored? And how can I share them? And what are the likely size and so on? Or what tools can I use to collect these artifacts? So we extract them into a template, and then we can share the template. So basically, by sharing the template, we are sharing the knowledge. We are actually sharing the artifacts themselves. So we come up with the prototypes. So we actually have a working prototype. So basically, you are able to actually load the case, and then from the collection, so you are able to abstract the information, the digital forensic artifacts by doing the forensic analysis. And then from there, you are able to actually abstract the schema and then share. And in this case, the schema or template can actually be shared either through your organization, or it can be a cloud-based or community-based platform that you can share with other participating law enforcement agencies or other organizations. And again, this is our template. So basically, so from this schema itself, you are able to know that, okay, if you are doing an examination of this device, so these are the type of artifacts that you're most likely going to encounter and where you can actually get them from, as I mentioned earlier. So again, the platform can be a cloud-based, or we can as well use blockchain. So in this particular work, because as I mentioned earlier, many of these data, when it comes to sharing the data, it can be sensitive. So we may not want to share this data, but at the same time, we want to share our knowledge. So in addition to the platform that I mentioned, the schema, but because increasingly we are using machine learning in digital forensics. For example, we want to train our AI model as in trying to identify the potential forensic artifacts that can be collected from these different devices, especially from devices that we have never encountered. So how can we actually train this machine learning model? We are actually getting access to the raw data itself, which is the forensic artifacts. So in this case, we actually built a blockchain-based trading data trading platform using Intel SGX. So basically, in this platform itself, we actually provide APIs to actually the various data sets. So depending, for example, if we have data set A, B, and C, owned by organizations A, B, and C, whereas A, B, and C, they are not allowed to share their data set, their raw data set, but they're actually allowed researchers to train the machine learning model on their data sets through some APIs. So this is what we propose, actually using a blockchain-based platform to actually facilitate the sharing of data, the training of AI models, and so on. And there are a number of potential research opportunities. So when it comes to big data, when it comes to digital forensics, these days, it's not about lack of data. In fact, there's so much data out there that it's impossible to analyze. So how do we actually do a triage? So when we are doing a triage, what are the potential implications? What about selection bias? So for example, if we use machine learning model, because many of the machine learning models, they are not interpretable, they are not explainable. So how do we actually explain, how do we actually prevent selection bias in the sense that why is this evidence, or why are this set of forensic artifacts chosen and over another set of forensic artifacts? Is there any way that we can actually explain that? Because there's so much data out there, as I mentioned earlier, there's no way we can actually examine everything. So how do we actually more effectively select the right set of forensic artifacts to examine? And also when it comes to forensic ready tools, and I mean earlier we have a look at Shodan. So there's search engine out there like Google, Shodan for various purposes. Do we have a similar search engine for forensic? So for example, if I want to do a forensic investigation, I want to search for, say, certain artifacts A. All I have to do is just to go to the search engine and then search for artifacts A, and it's going to present the result just like Google or just like Shodan. But the thing is, there's no such search engine right now for forensic analysis. So can we actually design a Google-like search engine, something like Hadoop for big data analytics or TensorFlow for AI? Can we design something like this for forensic analysis, whether it's IoT or digital forensics? And also, as I mentioned earlier, machine learning. So how can we actually use machine learning to help us facilitate real-time incident response and forensic investigation? For example, earlier I mentioned about the digital forensic black box. Because right now, one of the challenge when it comes to digital forensic research or investigation is there's the lack of data in the well, there's a lack of publicly accessible data in the sense that every agency they have their own data based on the cases they have investigated. But the thing is, those data cannot be shared because of privacy reasons, because of various legislation reasons. So how can we actually facilitate the sharing of this data? That's why I mean, in the earlier slide, we proposed this data sharing platform. So can we actually use some sort of a data sharing platform where we actually train our machine learning model on this confidential, this private data set, in a way that we still can train the machine learning model or the deep learning model to help us to more efficiently conduct forensic investigation. We are actually getting access to raw data during the training. And again, because we only have 10 to 15 minutes today, so I didn't have time to go into deepfake. But again, I think deepfake is something that has been in the news for at least in the last 6 to 12 months. So there are many deepfakes out there, whether it's text, audio, and videos. So the thing is, can we trust the evidence that we are going to present in court? How do we know that the evidence we present in court is actually real, the real thing, and not some deepfake materials? So can we actually use machine learning or deep learning approach to actually help us defeat or detect deepfake materials? And how confident are we when we present evidence that in court that this is actually fake or this is not fake? And at the same time, because to me, I believe cybersecurity and digital forensic, they go hand in hand. Because in order to gain access to the data on the devices, in many cases, we need to use exploit. We need to exploit vulnerabilities in some systems, whether it's operating systems or in the implementation error of an encryption algorithm in order to get access to data. So again, on the topic of machine learning, can we actually use machine learning to help us identify and exploit vulnerabilities to gain access to evidence for a court purpose? Well, it may be controversial depending on which country you are working at or the legal systems. And another potential topic is actually explainable AI in digital forensics, especially for court. So if you use AI techniques to actually help you collect evidence, or you use AI techniques to help you analyze the evidence, are you able to explain in court as to how do you actually arrive at these decisions? Because right now, many of the algorithm, as I mentioned, is actually black box. So there's no way that you can actually explain how did this algorithm actually arrive at this decision. All you know is I input this, I provide this input, and this is the output that I get. I have no idea what goes in the box. That's why it's a black box. So can we actually design explainable AI techniques to help us to conduct some of the digital forensic analysis or even collection of evidence? And then we are at the same time, we are still able to explain what goes on. So as I mentioned earlier, I think data set is actually one of the challenge when it comes to doing forensic analysis. So right now, we're actually building a honeynet architecture for IoT device, where we are going to have both physical and virtual devices. So what we are hoping to understand here is, I mean, because this is a honeynet, so we are going to expose part of the honeynet to the outside world. So what we are hoping to see is how to actually understand, how do actually the attackers actually attack the system? What exploit do they use? How do they actually go around doing their reconnaissance? So basically, I think Thomas Hott earlier in his keynote speech, he mentioned about crime script. So basically, we are hoping to build a crime script here to actually explain some of the cyber criminal activities so that we can better understand the behavior. And then based on this data and based on this behavior, we can maybe actually train our machine learning models to better detect some of this intrusion as well. So with that, I end my presentation. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Professor Che, for sharing lots of knowledges in both technical and non-technical responses to any risk in cyber security. And thank you. And our last presenter for session 3 is Professor Kim, Seung-Ju Kim at Korea University. Professor Kim is now professor at School of Cybersecurity in Korea University and was a member of Presidential Committee on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And for this session, Professor Kim will present on some controversial topic of cyber threat from North Korea. 김 교수님 20분 내로 부탁드리겠습니다.
The presentation will be made in 20 minutes.
Can you hear me?
예, 말씀하시죠.
Yes.
Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thanks for inviting me these honorable discussions. And I'm Seung-Ju Kim from Korea University, and today I'll talk about the North Korea's cyber powers. First of all, do you know what this number means? According to the Korean intelligence agencies, there are more than 1.62 million hacking attempts per day to the South Korean government and also the agencies. Most of these attacks originated from North Korea and followed by the China and Russia's. And also in recent days, attacks from the Iran and Pakistan have increased. Also in nowadays, there have been more attacks mainly targeting private companies rather than public institutions. Our agency think that the hacking damage is estimated at 60% and 14% for private and public sectors respectively. Our government think that North Korea has a totally more than 6,000 cyber soldiers. Among them, 1,700 are hacking experts, and the last 5,100 members are support members. This table shows that the representative North Korean hacking groups, including Lazarus, Blunov, and Andariel, and Reaper. Here, the hacking group Lazarus is considered as the main culprit of the Sony hacking case. And the Blunov hacking group is believed to be the main culprit of the Swift hacking case. Here you should note that depending on the analysis company, North Korean hacking groups are called different names. For example, the hacking group called Andariel is the same group called as Silent Cholima, and Red Dot is the same group called as Labyrinth Cholima, and Blunov is same as the Stardust Cholima. When I'm talking about the North Korea's hackings, most of people ask to me that, how about these North Korean hacker skills? They also asked me that North Korea's hacking skill is really good. There are many opinions about the North Koreans' hacking skills, but I think that North Korea students have a very good foundations for computer science itself. As an evidence, foreign IT experts evaluated that North Korea has potentials to replace Indian software outsourcing markets. This is related articles published in 2012. And also, there is a very famous international collegiate programming contest called ACM ICPC. But several years ago, students from Kim Il-sung University in North Korea participate in this contest. In this ACM ICPC contest held in 2016, North Korean teams ranked at higher than Stanford University teams. This is Kim Il-sung University teams. These are teams from the Kim Il-sung University ranked at 228th. And this is Stanford University teams. And this team ranked at 51 is our university. As shown this, I think that the students from the North Korea who study about the hacking skills has very good foundations about computer science itself. And also, North Korean hackers have a very strong motivations, such as Kim Jong-un's encouragements, and also they have very solid knowledge about the military operations. Because of these, tracking the North Koreans hackers attack is becoming more and more a difficult one. Yes, in order to stop this kind of North Korean hackings, our government tried to many kind of the policies to stop the North Korean hackings. I will focus on the four main policies of Korea. The first one is about the government organizations. Our Korean government has a very well-organized response systems for each areas, with the Blue House as its control towers. National Intelligence Service, as called, it is one of the Korean CIA. NIS is responsible for the public sectors, and also the MSIT is responsible for the private sectors. And also we have a Cyber Command for military sectors. And the second effort is that we have very strong network separation policies. From 2007, our government adopted the network separation policies. And from the 2012 August, our government adopted network separation policies also for the private sectors, such as internet service providers and big web portals with an average of more than 1 million visitors per day. And also, 2013, our government extended our network separation policy to the financial sectors. Yes, but most of people think that network separation policies are also being implemented in other countries. But our Korean network separation policy is very stronger than that of other countries. As shown this slide, our government has a policy to completely disconnect organizations' intranet from the internet. As you can see, our government's internet service is totally disconnected from the internet. But foreign countries has a policy to separate networks according to the importance of the data. As you can see in this slide, they separate top secret zones and secret zones and unclassified zones, and then keep non-classified, unclassified business computer systems connected to the internet all the times. The third one is about the cyber threat information sharing systems. Today, information sharing systems is recognized as a very important means to effectively prevent cyber attacks. And so many countries such as US, EU, UK, Japan are establishing cyber threat information sharing systems at national levels. Also, our government have information sharing systems like other countries. From 2014, Korea Internet Security Agencies, Korea Internet and Security Agencies developed the CTAS. It means cyber threat analysis and sharing systems. to profile and sharing not only the collected malware, but also the hacked host and used vulnerability and even the attackers. And the fourth effort is about the investing in the human resources. In 2012, our government was inspired by Israel's Talpit programs and made Department of Cyber Defense at Korea University. In 2016, we graduated 30 students for the first time. This is a joint educational program with the Korea Cyber Command. The students of this department has a full scholarship, and after their graduations, they should employed in in military sectors for 7 years. We accept top-tier students in the National College entrance examinations. And also, we have several public sector and government sectors cybersecurity education programs, such as CS Tech and KISA Academia, and so on. And among them, most famous one is Kitris BOB programs. This best BOB programs has a very strong peer-to-peer mentoring style education systems. But it is also true that the Korean government still has a homework to solve. The first one is about the network separation policies. As I said before, we have very strong network separation policies compared with other countries. But these network separation policies has some conflict with other policies, such as smart work and cloud service and cross-border private data transfer and so on. And also in the coming fourth industrial evaluation era, it will worsen worse because of our government totally separated our internet from internet. The second open problem is about the tracking hackers. Recently, authentic companies, here authentic means the open source intelligence. So nowadays, authentic companies have been in the spotlight. But as cyber threat intelligence companies are competitively disclosing threat profiling informations for proportional purpose, it is becoming more difficult to track hackers. And also, if there are no legal issues, private companies don't try to analyze the reason of the hacking accident. And also, nowadays, most of the developer uses the cloud and Docker systems. So it is possible for hackers to freely move the hacking tool development base from this place and another place very easily. And this makes tracking hackers very difficult. And furthermore, nowadays, hacking groups begin to share their exploit code and use it. This makes tracking more and more difficult. And also, nowadays, most of countries suffer from the COVID-19. These COVID-19 situations make the competitions of these COVID-19 situations intensify the competitions for technological hegemony. And also, this makes the situations where today's friends may become tomorrow's enemies. So this makes it more difficult to distinguish the enemies. And the third problem is about the sanction. Most of people say that when the North Korea attacked the Korean company or the other countries, we should take a cyber attacks against the North Korean government. But I think that retaliations through the cyber attacks is meaningless because North Korea is less dependent on the internet. So an eye for an eye style regulation is not effective. So we should adopt the proportional response. However, it is very difficult to do this without the participation of many countries around the world. And also, some experts say that North Korea's export of the cyber weapon systems should be banned. But this could lead to controversy about the cyber espionage problems with other countries. Yes, this is all I have prepared in the future, but I would be very grateful if everyone here could present a lot of ideas to solve my open problems. I have the exact solution about these four open problems, and these open problems not easy one, but I think that cyber attacks from North Korea is not technical one anymore. So we should adopt the political means, diplomatic means to stop the North Korean hackings. And because of this, we should collect more and more opinions from many countries around Korea. Thanks for your attention. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining the last session of the KIC International Forum. It is my great pleasure of participating in this forum as a moderator. I'm Young-Woo Jo, Deputy Director of the International Cooperation Division at Korean Institute of Criminology. First of all, I'd like to extend my sincere welcome to all the speakers, discussant, and audience. This session will last for about 1.5 hours with the theme of cyber sex crime. In particular, the session will address online sexual abuse, online sexual offender typology, and victim support. We will have 3 presentations and then panel discussion in which one discussant is designated for each presentation. This session will be live streamed via YouTube, and Korean-English interpretations are provided. I have no doubt that this session will help you better understand cyber sex crime, and you will enjoy it. Before we start, let me remind speakers and discussants, because our schedule is a little bit behind, so please have each presentation within 20 minutes and each discussion within 10 minutes. Now I'd like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Adam Basler, Professor and Chair of the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Georgia Southern University. Dr. Basler is a board member of the American Society of Criminology Division of Cybercrime, the International Interdisciplinary Research Consortium on Cybercrime, and the European Society of Criminologists Working Group on Cybercrime. His research focuses on the applicability of criminological theories to cybercrime offending and victimization, and the law enforcement response to cybercrime. His topic is immediate-basis sexual abuse, revising legislation to match the behavior and not the intent. Let's welcome Dr. Basler. Dr. Basler, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Basler, Professor and Chair of the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Georgia Southern University. We have campuses in 3 locations in Savannah, Statesboro, and Hinesville in Georgia, which is the United States of America. And I was asked to give a presentation on cyber harassment, but within a cyber sex context. And when I was thinking about ideas on what I really wanted to present, I thought the most important issue to discuss is how we can improve our legislation around image-based sexual abuse. When we start talking about image-based sexual abuse, it's important to think about all the different technologies that have existed and continue to be created over the last a couple of decades, and will continue. We always talk about how these digital technologies are always used for positive purposes, and we start talking about how some of them are used for criminal offending. But I don't think we really talk enough about how almost every digital technology you can think of in the past, right now, or every technology that'll be created in the future all has an ability to somehow inflict gendered violence against women and children. And it's something that, although we talk about how technology is related to cybercrime, we do not give enough focus on the impact that it has regarding women and children. So a pretty straightforward definition of image-based sexual abuse, it's the threat or actual non-consensual sharing, posting, or dissemination of nude or sexual images. Quite often, in the vernacular, people refer to this as revenge pornography. And a lot of legislation might refer to it as revenge pornography. But as we're going to see in the presentation today, we really should be referring to it as pornography because it has nothing to do with the idea of it all. It's simply just sexual abuse against women and children. And so a better way to think about image-based sexual abuse is the idea that it is an umbrella term that encapsulates a lot of different types of behavior. Paul et al. Point out that there's 3 different types of behaviors that fall underneath this larger category of image-based sexual abuse, with the first one being the non-consensual taking or creation of nude or sexual images. These are instances where the victim did not even know that their photos or images of themselves being nude were being taken. This could occur through hacking, or quite often also could happen through pictures of film being taken of individuals in public restrooms and similar places. The second type of behavior is what most people would refer more commonly as revenge pornography, which is the non-consensual sharing or distribution of nude or sexual images. And finally, we also have to realize that some of image-based sexual abuse is not just the actual sharing, but it's the threats of it. It's the blackmail of it, trying to get someone to do something that the offender wants by threatening to share these type of sexual images. So throughout this presentation, we should keep this much broader definition of what we mean by image-based sexual abuse. When we talk about the scope of the problem, it's quite challenging because our statistics vary so much by how we define it, the methods that scholars use, the different countries that a lot of these studies occur in, and also the sampling about whether we're talking about grade school, high school, college, or young adult samples. But when we look specifically at non-consensual transmitting victimization, what a lot of people would call revenge pornography, we see that for minors that it seems to range anywhere from 10 to 20% of minors have been victimized, where someone that they trusted with a nude photo of themselves sent it to someone else or showed that picture to someone else without their permission. For adults, it appears that the victimization prevalence is actually lower, somewhere between 1 to 12% possibly. However, when we start talking about perpetration, we see that there's a much higher percentage. That when we quite often talk about the dark figure of crime, these are usually crimes unknown to the police. And we start talking to victims, we start finding out that there's a lot more crime out there. However, when we talk about cybercrime, including image-based sexual abuse, we find out that there's a lot of crime that victims don't know about. So when we talk to offenders, it appears that 12 to 30% of minor and young adult samples have shown or transmitted a sexual image to someone else without the consent of the person who originally provided that picture. That's a pretty shocking statistic. When we look at the impact on victims, we see that the effects can range from emotional to social and economic. And of course, it can lead to some issues such as anxiety or lack of trust and loss of confidence in oneself. It can really lead to fear, depression, and suicidal ideation. In fact, according to a lot of organizations, it seems that almost a majority of victims will have experienced some type of severe mental health as a result of being a victim of image-based sexual abuse. The social effects can also be including exclusion and alienation, not wanting to hang out with your friends, or actually not wanting to go online, trying to stay away from the abuse. Economic effects can, of course, include court costs, lost jobs, and the amount of bills that can come with all the mental health impact. These effects are both short-term and long-term, with the effects quite often not only ranging in months, but also in the years. When we talk about what we should do about image-based sexual abuse, we quite often only focus on it from a criminological perspective, a very narrow view, but we really need to examine from a much broader perspective. And most scholars out there who are studying who are studying image-based sexual abuse really argue we should study from a feminist approach. And we do that, we can really see the amount of inequality out there and how that leads to a patriarchal society. That we really need to look at the offending of image-based sexual abuse, the victimization of it, but also the legal response to it, which is what we're talking about today. And when we start looking at the legal response to it, we start asking questions not about the actions that victims take, but really the actions of the offenders and why society accepts and approves it, such as why is there such a demand for pornography in general? Why is there such a demand for amateur pornography, for different types of gonzo pornography? Why do we put the blame on the victim rather than the offender? Why don't we actually try to do more about this? And quite often when we look at why we don't do more about this, it tells us a lot about our surroundings and the society we live in. So we need to start taking this much more seriously in a feminist perspective as an important way to deal with this, because we won't be able to legislate our way out of it. We really have to do more about gender inequality in general in our society and try to erode the culture of humiliation that exists in general, but especially attacks women and children. When we look at U.S. legislation, we do see that most states have passed what they might call revenge pornography legislation. Only 4 states have not in the U.S: Wyoming, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Massachusetts. However, most states really only consider it to be a misdemeanor. Some states do consider it a felony, although quite often they have a lot of restrictions on it. A lot of states simply try to deal with image-based sexual abuse by its current child pornography or blackmail statutes. When we look at what really needs to occur in the U.S., and very possibly around the world, but this presentation is really only focused on the U.S., we need to move away from certain terms. Words matter. We have to move away from phrases such as revenge pornography and move to phrases such as image-based sexual abuse. As pointed out earlier, this has nothing to do with pornography. It is a way to humiliate and try to control women and children through sexuality and to try to keep them in a certain position in patriarchal societies. In addition, we need to try to have our legislation not refer to the intent of the actor. In some cases, it might be about revenge or harassment or humiliation, but there's many other reasons why image-based sexual abuse continues to occur. Therefore, the focus really needs to be on the act itself, the fact that it's the non-consensual transmission or showing of these images. Then in the end, it doesn't matter why the person did it. It makes us focus on the offender in the act rather than the sexuality of it. And also it makes sure that we do not have to try to make the victim defend their actions. So instead of asking the victim why they took the picture, why did they share it with someone else, and it also asks whether there was consent to share. Instead, it makes us focus on the offender. Why do you have the photo? Were you allowed to have this photo? Why did you choose to share it? Did you explicitly have consent to show this picture to others? And can you prove it? And many examples of good legislation in the U.S. can be found on the website of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, which is a nonprofit organization. And when we started looking at some of their models, they show some examples at both the federal and also the state level. So when we look at the federal level, for one of their examples, in case if the U.S. wants to improve their statutes, or if another nation wants to try to follow the steps of the U.S. a little bit, we see the first half of this model really kind of fits the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in the U.S. about how the internet and electronic devices and wires should not be used for illegal purposes if it's going to cross state, federal, or international boundaries. But when we look at the second half of the statute, we see some important aspects. First, it's that whether a person can be identifiable and whether they can be connected with any type of sexually explicit conduct. Then it also includes whether any type of naked genitals or nipples are exposed. Those two things are important to distinguish because quite often a lot of revenge pornography statutes only focus on whether the person is identifiable, but also whether any part of the image shows them nude. And if it doesn't show any part of themselves nude, it's very possible the statute does not apply. So you could have a fully clothed person who's identifiable who's participating in oral sex, and revenge pornography statutes would not cover that. Or if there's something else, such as if the victim is shown being is simply having been sex or rape, but at no part, if their sexual organs are not being shown, the revenge pornography statute might not actually cover. So it's important that these statutes also include when the person is clothed, but it's clear that the person's engaging in any type of sexual activity. And then it's also, as we point out, there's no intent anywhere in the statute, and whether the offender had knowledge of or reckless disregard for the fact that the depicted person did not consent to the distribution. When we look at examples for state law, it's also quite similar as well. For an example, if any state wants to improve, there's no discussion of intent in these statutes. And once again, it covers whether the person is participating in any type of sexual act or whether there is any type of nudity shown in there. And when we look at these statutes, they provide very good definitions. So we can see how inclusive the words disclose mean, or image, or what's all involved in intimate parts or sexual acts. The Cyber Civil Rights Organization, as I mentioned before, which is a nonprofit organization in the U.S. that was founded by a victim of revenge pornography, and their website has been quite instrumental in the passing and endorsement of some of these improvements of these statutes. They point out that the Illinois model, or the laws that Illinois has, is a pretty good statute in order for other states to improve what they're currently doing. They provide 7 reasons. Because of time, I'll quickly go over some of these. But when we look at the Illinois statute, they do not talk about motive. Selfies can be included because it does not matter where the picture came from. We should not be blaming victims. In fact, a majority of non-consensual pornography starts off as selfies. So the real issue, once again, is the offender sharing this information, sharing these images without consent. The Illinois model has strong punishments associated with it. It is not only just focused on nudity, but once again, sexual acts that it's clear the person is participating in and the person is identifiable. It's also very important because it also focused on downstream distributors. Some statutes only focus on the very first person who shares the image without consent. But it's important that statutes focus on whether a reasonable person would know that they should be sharing and further showing these pictures to other individuals. So downstream distributions of these images would be illegal as well. It honors the First Amendment, meaning that it allows for legal pornography. It also allows for people to report these images to the police. It allows law enforcement to share these photos with other law enforcement agencies in order to do investigations. And also specifically discusses doxing, where quite often we see over half of these types of illegal images provide images and information on the victim. So it makes it illegal for individuals to contact these individuals, to contact the victims and to harass them. We should point out that this is also very relevant for South Korea as well. Over the last several years, there's been quite a few international cases of revenge pornography, or also MOCA, the illegal filming of people with hidden cameras. And although there has been some statutes passed over the last couple of years where distribution of revenge pornography is up to 3 years of prison, and if it's actually filmed illegal, it might be up to 10 years, we see that the fines associated with these offenses are quite low. That in US dollars is only $4,500 or possibly $9,000 even for a felony. And then we talk about MOCA offenses. Some estimates show that maybe only 2% of them are actually in the prison sentences. And so this is just not a US issue of not taking this issue seriously enough, but it seems like many countries could improve their enforcement of this. So how do we move forward? In the last couple of minutes I have, how do we move forward with this? It's important not only to improve our legislation like I've been talking about, we also need to desperately improve our training and funding for law enforcement to deal with these. There's simply not enough focus on it for law enforcement and prosecutors to examine these issues more. And part of this training actually might focus on the impact of the victims. If law enforcement understands how significant that these crimes are to victims, they actually might want to get involved more. Law enforcement needs to learn more about the referrals that they can give to the victims, such as victim advocacy referrals. The officer and the victims also have to know more about what options they have. So if the victim asks the police officer, "What can I do?" a police officer has to be able to know what they can tell the victim, or at least refer them to the correct agency. As I pointed out, if we really tackle this from a feminist perspective, we realize we can't deal with this simply through legislation, but we really have to do more about gender inequality and try to deal with that. And that actually has the largest impact in the short and long term, and not just trying to change some wording with legislation. And finally, last slide, I just want to point out that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. As I've been talking about, there's many organizations out there, but one good example of a nonprofit organization that's making a big difference is the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative. And they have many good statutes that I've been talking about. Any person who's interested in this can actually read reports. They can look at the statutes for every state in the US. They can look at those model statutes. And they can also find out how they can become involved if they want to try to make a difference with this. So once again, thank you for inviting me to give a presentation on this really important issue. And I'll reserve questions. You can either email me, or when the presentation goes live, I'll also be more than happy to talk about this and answer any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bosler, for your presentations. And we are going to have discussion panel later when you finish all the presentations. We are going to have the second speaker, Dr. Ashley Ball, Senior Research Associate in West Edge Health and Justice Program. Dr. Ball has conducted research and evaluation on diverse topics, including training for law enforcement, tasked with investigating technology facilitated crimes against children, and innovations for intimate partner violence offender, among others. Her work has been published in prominent academic journals, including Psychological Assessment, American Journal of Preventive Medicine, and Violence and Victims. Her today's topic is examining online sexual exploitation of children, offender typologies. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Ball. Dr. Ball, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Bohl, and I'm a Senior Research Associate in WestEd's Justice and Prevention Research Center. And I'm happy to be here today to discuss online sexual exploitation of children offender types, including where they converge and how they can be used. Before I start, though, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the team that supported the development of this presentation. I truly appreciate all of your work to make this possible. So thanks to everyone on this list. So with that, I'll go ahead and give you a roadmap of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to start by giving a brief introduction to what I mean by technology-facilitated sexual exploitation of children. I'll then give an overview of available typologies to help build understanding of the characteristics of offenders of these types of crimes. After this overview, I'll describe where these typologies converge and how they differ, and I'll conclude by highlighting why these typologies are useful to law enforcement, as well as their limitations. So I'd like to start by grounding everyone in what I mean by technology-facilitated exploitation of children. Defining terms in this area can be difficult. Individuals from research, law enforcement, and legal backgrounds utilize varied terms, and even within these groups, there's a large degree of variation in how terms are used and defined. This variation creates challenges in conducting research on these crimes in a systematic way. For example, it can make it harder to document the frequency of these crimes and compare crimes across countries or jurisdictions when definitions vary. With this caveat in mind, I'll share how we conceptualize technology-facilitated sexual exploitation of children to guide our examination of offender typology. Our working definition is inclusive of online sexual solicitation of children, which includes asking children to engage in sexual activities or talk. It includes technology-facilitated sex trafficking, such as using the internet to assist with the recruitment or soliciting of a child for a commercial sex act. And it includes the production and distribution of child exploitative materials. This definition may be helpful to keep in mind as we think about the volume of these crimes and the types of offenders who commit these crimes. We know that technology-facilitated sexual exploitation of children is a large and a global issue. For example, since 1998, when the cyber tip line for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, was created in the United States, they have received more than 74 million reports of potential child exploitation, including abusive images of children, online enticement, child sex trafficking, and child sexual molestation. In 2019 alone, the cyber tip line received more than 16.9 million reports. The constantly evolving and anonymous nature of the internet allows offenders to engage in these crimes from locations all over the world, creating challenges for law enforcement as they try to navigate how to identify victims and apprehend offenders in this global and cross-jurisdictional context. Given the pervasive nature of this issue, researchers have attempted to develop typologies to better understand offender strategies and their motivations. Although the details of these typologies vary, they share the ultimate goal of better understanding offender strategies and motivations in order to ultimately inform decisions regarding investigation, sentencing, treatment, and supervision. So they do have the potential to be quite useful. When we go to the literature to determine what typologies should be considered to better understand offender motivations and strategies, we see that there have been numerous typologies offered to better understand these offenders, most of which emerging over the last 2 decades. So I'm going to take some time to walk you through each of these typologies briefly. The first typology was offered by Hartman and colleagues, and it was published in 1984. And this typology was not focused on online offenders. Instead, it was focused on those who collect sexually abusive images broadly, so pre-widespread use of the internet. Although it's not specific to online offenders, you will see that the 4 types identified by Hartman and colleagues share many similarities with the technology-specific typologies that appear to have set the foundation for these more specific typologies that emerge later. This typology includes 4 types that are differentiated by whether the offender collects sexually abusive images in secret without contact, collects images in conjunction with contact, shares images with others, or seeks financial gains from their collecting behaviors. The next typology was published in 2004 by Crone. This typology differentiates each type by examining the extent to which the offender networks with other offenders, the level of security utilized to prevent detection, and whether the abuse is indirect or direct. As you can see from this typology, it resulted in a large number of offender types that differ across these three dimensions. And the result of this typology is that it functions kind of like a trajectory of offending behaviors from least to most serious, with those who may accidentally view child exploitative materials, perhaps by responding to spam or accidentally clicking something on a website, all the way to those who have physically abused children, as well as those who produce and distribute materials of them or others abusing children. So it really shows quite the trajectory. Sullivan and Beach also published a typology in 2004 that was focused more specifically on offenders who collect abusive images rather than the entire spectrum of abusive behaviors. This typology specified three types that varied based on whether or not there was contact and their intent behind collecting, with some offenders collecting out of curiosity without the desire to have contact with children, and others collecting to feed their progressing interest in children and potentially having contact. Alexi and colleagues suggested yet another typology just a year later. This typology was developed using data from print and media coverage to examine characteristics of offenders. This analysis resulted in three types that vary based on whether offenders traffic or collect child exploitative materials online, engage in discussion with children and attempt to meet them in person, or engage in both those behaviors. In 2011, Briggs and colleagues examined internet chat room records from offender cases and developed a typology based on those records. This typology is somewhat different than some of the others that are out there because it doesn't focus on offenders broadly, but instead is focused on the subset of offenders who engage in chats with minors. So it's less about those that collect and distribute materials and more about that personal interaction with the children over chat. Based on their analysis, they specified two offender types, those whose goal is to make contact with children and those whose goal is to engage in explicit discussion online without ever meeting in person. Webster and colleagues also took a different approach than some other scholars in developing a typology that they introduced in 2012. Rather than looking at behavior, these researchers conducted interviews with offenders to better understand their motivations and classify their grooming behaviors. In their framework, the three types are differentiated based on previous sexual offending, whether or not they concealed their identity, and the extent to which they had exploitative materials of children. It also utilized information about their level of networking with other offenders to differentiate the types. The next typology that emerged was developed by Tenner and colleagues in 2015. The authors utilized law enforcement reports to develop offender types. This typology includes 4 types that differ based on their patterns of online communication, such as whether they meet the victims online or know the victims in person first, and then communication progresses to online. They also included the extent to which they conceal their identity and the relationship dynamics of the victim with the victim, such as the speed of the relationship and whether it's reciprocal. The level of sex crime expertise was also considered as a factor to differentiate these types. In 2016, Clevenger and colleagues published a study examining characteristics of offenders, which resulted in their description of 3 specific types that emerged in their data. From this research, they determined that characteristics of offenders differed among those who exclusively possessed child exploitative materials, those who attempted or committed physical contact, and those who produced or distributed child exploitative materials. The final typology in this review was offered by DeHart and colleagues in 2017. To develop their typology, the researchers examined evidence from technology-facilitated crimes against children cases and identified 4 offender types. These offenders varied based on whether they attempted or committed physical contact and whether they paid for exploitive materials or contact. So as you can see, there are a large number of typologies available, with each using different language, different criteria, and focusing on different parts of the offender population. Given this, we thought it would be helpful to unpack how these typologies converge and where they differ. In looking at the typologies, we examined the criteria used to differentiate offenders. And this led us to 8 different dimensions that we saw used within at least 2 typologies, as well as some other factors that were used in kind of one typology but not repeated elsewhere that aren't included here. So as you can see, whether or not offenders attempted or engaged in physical contact with victims was used across all typologies. This appears to be a very meaningful differentiator regarding how an offender behaves and what their kind of trajectory of offense looks like, regardless of how the typology was constructed and what offender population it was focused on. Whether or not offenders collect child exploitative materials was another common dimension within these typologies, and it was observed in 7 out of the 9. And the 2 typologies that don't differentiate based on whether the offender collects explicit materials were the typologies that were focused on internet chat records and offender motivations. So I think it seems that the lack of inclusion there is really specific to the population or kind of the orientation of the typology. Whether or not exploitive materials were shared with others and the level of networking with other offenders was included as a dimension in 4 of the 9 typologies. The frameworks that didn't utilize this dimension were those I just described, as well as those that focused more on using the internet to engage with children, for example, through chat, rather than to network with other offenders. Intent was also a dimension in 4 of the typologies. And interestingly, this dimension was utilized in nearly all of the typologies that did not include the sharing dimension. The ones that included the sharing dimension appeared to be more focused on behaviors, while the ones that included the intent dimension appeared to be more focused on motivations behind the behaviors. So that kind of helps differentiate why those factors were present in some and not so much in others. 3 typologies considered the offender's technical sophistication or their ability to hide in cyberspace or conceal their identity as a dimension to differentiate types. And this dimension actually, interestingly, went across those that could be seen as more focused on behavior as well as those more focused on motivation or intent. Just 2 typologies included a financial aspect, including whether offenders sell exploitative materials for profit or whether they pay to receive exploitative materials or contact. And finally, 2 typologies explicitly included sex crime history as a factor for differentiating offenders. And these same 2 typologies also included a dimension about offender dynamics with their victim. This consolidation helps us understand what factors might be the most useful to differentiate offenders. Across all typologies, it appears that physical contact, whether images are collected or shared, offender intent, and ability to conceal are probably the most useful or are going to be viewed across multiple sources of literature as important compared to some of the others that may be more specific toward a certain subgroup. So although these typologies may be helpful to consider, I do want to note that there are several limitations when we want to think about offender typologies and how to use them. First, there has been limited synthesis across typologies, which can make it difficult to know which to use in practice when different typologies offer different advice on how to think about offender groups. Second, the extent to which and type of data used to develop each typology varied widely, as did the samples. This creates a situation where a one-to-one comparison of typologies may be inappropriate without considering the context in which it was created. So really understanding, was this typology focused on internet chat versus was this focused on arrest records, and what does that mean for interpreting it? Finally, and in my perspective, most significantly, there's a lack of research testing the extent to which these typologies are actually useful. Further research in this area would help determine which typologies are most accurate and the extent to which typologies should be relied on in the field. Despite these limitations, we know that the number of cases law enforcement is tasked with often far exceeds the number they can actively investigate at any given time. To ensure resources are directed to stop the most dangerous offenders and save children in most immediate harm, the prioritization of cases becomes important. We know that cases should be prioritized when they involve production of child exploitative materials, luring of minors to meet in person, and cases with offenders with a known history of committing these types of crimes. Thus, training should emphasize strategies to investigate the most dangerous offenders, which potentially could be identified by having a solid grasp of available typologies and the characteristics to look for within these typologies. So if you remember back to earlier in this presentation, I noted that typologies can be helpful to understand offender strategies and motivations, as well as to inform investigations, sentencing, treatment, and supervision. With this in mind, the practical application of typologies might help make decisions regarding which offenders are most likely to do the most immediate harm, which offenders are likely to engage in the most harmful offenses, which investigative strategies might be most appropriate for a given offender or a given type of crime, when to push for harsher sentences, and the appropriate approach to supervision and post-release requirements. All of these decisions can be incredibly difficult to make, but are extremely important to effectively protect children. Typologies are one piece of information that may be useful in making these hard calls. So with that, I will share with you the references that were discussed in this presentation, as well as my contact information in case you have any questions after today's presentation. Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Bauer, I greatly appreciate your presentations. And I have a quick notice for speakers. During the session, we receive questions in the chatting window. Due to the time limit, we cannot address the questions, but it will be grateful if speakers can answer the questions. I think we have questions already, maybe for Dr. Bastler, so why don't you check the chatting window? Okay, let's have the last speaker, Ms. Sung-Hye Park, Manager of Advocacy Center for Online Sexual Abuse Victims at the Women's Human Rights Institute of Korea. Before joining the institute, she served as CEO of a documentary of women's video production company. Also, she got involved in many projects such as Seoul International Women's Film Festival and Women's History Exhibition Center at the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. Her topic is understanding digital sexual violence and victim support. Please welcome Manager Sung-Hye Park. Sung-Hye Park, please.
네, 안녕하세요. Hello. My name is Park Sung-Hye. I'm with the Advocacy Center for Online Sexual Abuse Victims at the Women's Human Rights Institute of Korea. I would like to briefly tell you a little bit about the work that we do at our Advocacy Center. We are seeing digital sexual violence on the rise, and that is why in 2016 there was a comprehensive act that was passed in Korea. In 2017, the act was passed, and in 2018, the next year, our center was established. And as you can see, we offer counseling, support, and the removal of images, leading the support, and also we also help the victims work together with other support organizations like the Sunflower Center and various other victims advocacy groups. also advocacy groups for children, for young minor victims as well. So we also liaison with other support organizations. Let me tell you a little bit about our victim support system. We have an online bulletin board. We also have a hotline that's open 24 hours a day. So we can receive calls and reports 24 hours a day, as I mentioned, because we have this open line and a hotline, and we can immediately provide victim advocacy through counseling support and to help them remove these images from the internet. For those victims whose images have been found to be distributed, or even if not, we continue to try to monitor the situation to see if the images have indeed been distributed. So we try to help the victims alleviate their concerns and their anxiety. And if the images have been found to be distributed, then we try to remove those images with the help of various other interested parties, such as the police agency and the Korea Communication Standards Commission. So we work together with them in coordination through also with investigative activities. Let me just briefly share with you some statistics. This is up until last year, so this is the most current statistics that we have. There's illegal photography, distribution, threat, or blackmail, and anxiety, etc. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this later on, but there's also photo augmentation, which is photoshopping, and cyberbullying or harassment. So we try to see this from the point of view of victims. Earlier, Professor Adam Bosler said that it's important for us to take a feminist perspective. We also think that it's very important, and also try to see this from the point of view of media literacy. Our employees continue to try to get advocacy training and education so that we can help victims better. Obviously, 60% of the victims suffer distribution or sharing of these pictures and non-consensual filming. We ask the hosts and web managers of different P2P sites and porn sites to take down the images. Let me share with you some of the statistics that we have for the first half of this year. There have been some big issues as of late in Korea, the Telegram incident, and in April, the perpetrators were arrested. Since April, we've seen a huge increase in the number of reports, victims coming forward to us, and so the government has actually even passed an extra budget. And beginning at the end of August to September, and even now, we've been providing even more advocacy to victims. We've brought in an additional 50 employees. Currently, we have already removed about 170,000 images. As you can see here, this is for the first half of this year. We were able to help about 2,100 or so victims. This is almost equal to the entire number of victims of last year. So just first half of this year, we've seen a number of victims that is commensurable to the number of victims for the entire year of 2019. We've been able to see the outrage in Korea after the Telegram incident. We've seen a lot of calls coming in. All of this really began with the Telegram incident, but this has, I think, raised more awareness about the issue of cyber online image-based sexual violence. We've also seen a lot of calls from minors as well and young victims. Next, I'd like to talk about the different kinds of types of digital sexual violence and the different support services that we offer to them depending on the category of the abuse. This is the category that we use within our center, within our advocacy center. So you might think that this is a lot of different categories, but in fact, these come with additional subcategories. First is obviously the most well-known, which is the illegal or non-consensual filming or taking or creation of these explicit images. Maybe mostly in cases of public places like public bathrooms and etc. Many of these cases, the victims are very motivated to voluntarily report the crime, and they really help out with the authorities to try to take down the perpetrator. And then there is also the non-consensual distribution of these images In many cases, we hear from victims who've already seen the distribution of their images online. And some cases, the videos or the images have been altered. They've been easily edited. In fact, people can edit it very easily with their smartphones now. And in some cases, the perpetrator would upload these in a series, in a story. In many of the cases, the victims become cognizant of this after the fact. And also, they hear about it through a third party. So they would call us saying that I heard from a friend of a friend that they saw my image somewhere. What should I do? When that happens, we try to move really quickly to try to monitor the situation, see where the images have been distributed so that we can take them down and remove them from the internet. In some cases, if the victim is a minor, it's difficult really to work together. We have to prove that this was non-consensual, which can be difficult, especially if it's a minor. And it's difficult for anyone really to give consent for the distribution of their sexually explicit images or videos. So we have to always make very clear that this was largely non-consensual. I have to say that Dr. Bosler's presentation was really memorable for me because we should not focus on the intent, but the fact that this was non-consensual, really, it should be the most important focus. We have to really look at this from the victim point of view. And that's how we have to address the situation. And I hope that's how we can have that here in Korea as well when we revise the relevant laws. There's also a lot of blackmail involved for distribution. Even if there was no distribution, the perpetrator would threaten to distribute this to other people. This could lead to a lot of anxiety for the victim, and there could be consistent blackmail, consistent threatening. And so it is very important to try to provide counseling to the victim. But because the victim is in so much pain and suffering, the victim is later, she tries to leave the chat room, or she just tries to remove all the images from her phone because it brings her so much suffering. But when that happens, when she leaves the chat room, then we lose access to a lot of the evidence. So we try to provide psychological supports and counseling while having access to that evidence so that that can help the authorities in their investigation. All victims are understandably afraid that there's going to be redistribution because, unfortunately, we also recognize the fact that once it is online, there can never be a perfect takedown or perfect removal of all of these images because these are files and they can be readily distributed and shared by many people and stored and saved in their other devices. And we've also seen after the Telegram incidents, many people calling into our center because they are scared and fearful that their videos and their images might be out there being shared and distributed by people unbeknownst to them. So we try to provide support, but if a person calls in with this vague fear and a vague anxiety without clear evidence of the fact that their images have been distributed, there's a limit to the kind of advocacy and counseling that we can do. We try to come up with more psychotherapy or other kind of counseling services for those types of victims. Recently, we've also seen more increasing cases of what we call body cam phishing images. So we've received a lot of calls from people when their distribution has been made through various messenger videos like Kakao and Telegram, WhatsApp. We try to work together with those developers, but it's difficult to remove all the images. This can lead to secondary or tertiary damage through online grooming and other instances, so we have to work really quickly on this. Next, I'd like to move on to sexual harassment or cyberbullying. The sexual harassment in cyberspace is a very big umbrella term, and this encapsulates many different kinds of harassment. This is not just relegated to various images. Of course, in many cases, it starts with images and it starts with videos. But other than these image-based sexual violence, there are other areas of sexual harassment. So, for example, maybe somebody would hack into another person's device to try to steal my phone. Or if I were to put my profile pic on Instagram, somebody would use that and Photoshop it with a graphic image and have that distributed elsewhere. And I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit further when I talk more about the Telegram case. The characteristics of especially minors who have been subjected to digital violence, we see that these minors, these young children are digital natives. They were really born with knowledge of this, and they're very used to using this digital environment. And their culture is that they feel very much used and familiar with using digital devices. A foundation in Korea issued a survey to about 600 middle schoolers or junior high students in 2017. Over 50%, nearly 60% of them said that you can have a friendship all online over the phone, and 21% said that I can have a romantic relationship with someone I meet online. And over 19% of them said that, yes, I've shared my pictures with somebody I've only met online. So this means that there's going to be higher instances of what we call online grooming because of all of these close personal relationships that form in cyberspace. Through one-on-one chatting, these chat forums and chat rooms, a perpetrator might advance a minor and establish a close personal relationship with them, get their images, and then distribute them. I mentioned a little bit about online sex exploitation, online sexual exploitation, together with online grooming. Rather than having this as one type of crime, they are different kinds of types of crimes that really overlap together and sometimes appear together. I have this separate slide on online sexual exploitation because I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into the different Telegram incidents that we've seen in the early part of this year in Korea. Minors, especially young children, teenagers, are very much preyed upon in these chat rooms. So their images are stolen from social media. And in many cases, some people have behaved like they are authorities, like they are the police, to get closer to minors and then get their images and then threaten and blackmail the minors, saying that they're going to distribute this online. And because of these blackmails and because of these threats, the minors feel like they have no choice but to submit to rape and other sexual abuse. The Telegram incidents were first known through the use of all of these different social media channels like Kakao Messenger and different messenger applications. So we tried to provide support in the form of having these images removed from these different messaging applications. And even within the Telegram application, we've seen different secret chat rooms later on made and opened for these perpetrators to go and hide when we take down one chat room. And so it's very difficult to try to access this kind of information. Because of these Telegram incidents, in April of this year, the government issued a government-wide response. And as I mentioned, they passed a supplementary extra budget, which is why we were able to hire a team of additional 50 more people into our center. So for this, instead of just providing post support to the victims after they call in their sexual abuse to us, we've tried to move with more resources preemptively to try to monitor all of these different chat rooms and different applications to see if there are any graphic images or non-consensual images that are already being distributed. In many cases, we see these composite photographs or Photoshop photographs where people would just download profile pics off Instagram or whatnot and Photoshop that together with graphic images and even put text on top of that. And recently, we've also had the inclusion of a new provision in our relevant laws, including the use of deep fakes. We've tried to really lobby the government to try to pass this. Hopefully, with this deep fake provision, this could give us a legal basis to take down more of these instances. But in many of the cases, some perpetrators who have been found to sort of just humiliate sexually humiliate the victim, this kind of case has not really been prosecuted to the fullest degree that we feel it is necessary. So that is one area that we find a little bit discouraging. So next, I'd like to move on to the deletion program that we have, where we work to remove the images and videos from online, from cyberspace. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to move quickly here. We provide this removal support based on the Act on the Prevention of Sex Violence and Victim Protection, Article 7.3. We ask online web supporters, these online applications or the domain hosts or the websites to help. We ask them to take down and remove these images. So it's very important that we have good international cooperation and collaboration with these domains and with these servers. We have come up with our own system to try to provide this removal support. We have a DNA values search system that we can do a search, a sweeping search through this center, do a crawling search, and then ask the domain or the web server to remove the images. We also developed this system last year with the application called WebHard in Korea. So for all WebHard drives, we can search, do a complete comprehensive search across all of the WebHards, these hard drives online in Korea, to try to search for all of these images. We also work closely with the police agency, obviously, so we have a regular investigative cooperation with the police agency, and obviously with the victim's consent. We share this together, share the information together with the police agency to facilitate their investigation. Lastly, I want to talk about cooperation with these online platforms. This is very important for us. At our center, we have to work closely with Naver, Google, Twitter, Facebook, all of these different platforms and websites. We are working closely with them. We also have dedicated channels for each of these different platforms. So even in this COVID-19 era, we meet them through Zoom to try to ask them to continue to work with us in removing these different images. And also these online platforms have been very active in stepping up their efforts to working with us. At our advocacy center, we really try to look at all of this from the point of view of the victims, and we try to come up with a strategic, very comprehensive support for our victims. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation.
Their presence has been invaluable and helped make our forum a great success. I believe that this forum provides us with an opportunity to reflect on the recent trend and issues of cybercrime, including cyber economic crime, cybersecurity, and cyber sex crime. I have no doubt that the dialogue that we have engaged in would be critical to implement effective cybercrime prevention policies. In closing, I extend my sincere gratitude to Dr. Kyung-Seok Chu, President of the Korean Society of Criminology in America, and Dr. Kyung-Sik Choi, Chair of the Cybercrime Division of the American Society of Criminology, for organizing the forum. For your information, all the presentations will be uploaded to YouTube and KIC website. And my special thanks to our staff, Seung-jin Lee, Juwon Na, Seyon Jung, Min Jung Kang, and technicians and translators. Without them, it's not possible to have this forum. It's time to say goodbye, because my stomach is growling. It's over 1 p.m. in South Korea. Oh, excuse me, we have the presence of our institution.
Hello, everyone. All of us are prepared to greet to you all. Please come, everyone.
I think we have a kind of ceremony to take a picture together. So if you stay online a little bit, we can take a picture people here offline.
감사합니다. Thank you so much for participation, Dr. Bosler and Dr. Bol. It was a great, excellent discussion and 최정선 과장님 그리고 박성희 팀장님,
Dr. Choi, Dr. Jo, and President So, thank you very much. This discussion has been very helpful and useful. Personally, I really like this session. And with the President, we're going to have a full family photo together. So could you please stay online, stay connected to the Zoom? Thank you.
Dr. Ball, I hope you have an opportunity of learning the situations of cybersex crime in South Korea. And 그리고 오늘 귀한 시간 내주셔서 정말 감사드립니다.
I would like to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Say goodbye. Bye. Thank you.